Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome to the Corporate Volunteering Quotient Report with Goodera. Happy to have you joining us. And as soon as we fill up the room, we will get going. I see a pause in our participant numbers, so I'll take this opportunity to welcome all of you to our Corporate Volunteering Quotient Report unveiling. We're excited to have you with us today. I'm Charlotte Payton with Goodera, and we're going to be diving into some of the top insights that emerged from our study of ERG reports of 162 companies. And I should mention these are audited ESG reports. And we're going to go through some benchmarking, and we're excited to share the results with you in just another minute. While we wait for everyone to join, we do have a poll question for you. It's popping up there on your screen, so we'll take about 30 seconds for you to answer that, and we'll review the results. So the question is, what do you hope to learn from today's session? We've got a couple of options here for you. Relevant benchmarks to guide your target setting. How can organizations break into the top 25% and really emulate that success? Which volunteering enablers and strategies should be prioritized, especially for organizations with limited budgets? Perhaps organizations who are looking to scale globally. We can cover that as well. So go ahead and I think you can pick more than one. So perhaps all of the above is the right answer for you. And I should mention, just to cover a few other pieces of logistics, that we will be monitoring the chat throughout the call today. I personally will not be looking at the chat until the very end when we have some Q&A, but we do have Goodera staff keeping an eye on that and responding to your questions as we go. So I think it's probably been about 30 seconds if we're ready to share the results of our first poll. And there we go. We've got most of you here to get some benchmarks for your target setting. And well, for all of these things, really, it looks like enablers to determine which strategies you should employ, especially if you have limited budgets, expanding globally. Fantastic. Looks like not as many of you are looking to break into that top 25. That's okay. That's okay. So not everybody can, has the bandwidth or wherewithal to be up in that top 25%. Great. All right. Well, then we will move forward. All right. So here is a quick glimpse at today's agenda. So we are going to get into the what and how of the report, understand the methodology for why we put this together. We're going to dive into our top insights, look at some benchmarks that we've uncovered, and get into some different enablers that can guide your strategy, and also, some different nuances of trying to expand geographically and what that might look like for your organization. And then we will wrap up with some Q&As, but before we get to that, we will also share with you the tool. And I should mention that this report is based on, like, you might be unfamiliar with the term quotient as we talk about reports, but this really comes from a tool that we use to crunch some numbers to get you this data. And So my name is Charlotte Payton, and my last professional full-time role was at Apple on the community investment team, and one of my key responsibilities was data analysis and reporting. So I love digging into the numbers, and I'm excited to walk you through this report with Goodera's fearless leader, the founder and CEO, Abhishek Hambat. And with that, I will turn it over to him.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. And, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much for joining us from all across the globe. Really excited to present our report and our study and our tool, which will help you benchmark your performance in terms of volunteering participation rates, understand what is best in class, and figure out your North Star metrics so that you could build a robust volunteering strategy moving forward. A very quick overview on the report. One is in terms of the content of the data that goes into this report. It is from the audited ESG reports of 162 companies. I think that is really important. There are tons of data sources. Some of them are audited, some of them are not, but the highest quality data source in terms of auditability is the ESG reports, which are public for these companies. So we use that to analyze the volunteering performance for a whole bunch of companies. As I mentioned, the goal is to provide you with benchmarks, one at a meta level, but also at an industry level based on your employee sizes, based on your geographic distribution of employees, so that you could understand where do you stand compared to the median and the best in class, figure out what should be your goal or target moving forward. And then we'll also share with you a whole bunch of enablers which can help you reach the goal that you decide or choose to. So that's essentially about the volunteering quotient report. And as Charlotte mentioned, it's actually what we call VQ, similar to IQ and EQ. There is VQ, which is volunteer quotient, which is about understanding where you stand compared to the benchmark. So actually, there is a tool which you could use, which will share more details of where you could actually understand where you stand from based on your employee base and your industry type.
Great. So if you have not downloaded our volunteer quotient report yet, here is the QR code you can scan to do that. You'll also have a link in your email if you don't have your phone handy at the moment. So let's get right into it. All right, we've got one more poll question for you before we start getting into the nuts and bolts here. So real quick, just to level set, wanted to understand the unique workforce participation rate in your organization. So if you wouldn't mind just taking 30 seconds, maybe less, to share if it's less than 10%, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30%, 30 to 40%, or above 40%. All right, that's an easy one. So I think we probably have some good results now. Let's see what we've got. Okay. Pretty even distribution. Most of you are in that 10 to 20 or 20 to 30% range. Couple of real shining stars over here with above 40%. That's phenomenal. Glad to hear it. We'll want to hear from you about what you're doing. All right, great. Now let's dive in. Okay, so Abhishek, why did you feel it was important to create this, not only this tool, but this report? And when we think about the other tools that are out there, right, like CECP report, Boston College corporate citizenship data, maybe our vendors have provided, like, Benevity, your cause, maybe they've provided some benchmarking with other organizations, other clients, so with everything that exists, what is different about this report that you felt was important to bring to this audience?
Thanks, Charlotte. And I think this one of the key reasons for the report is a lot of times our customers would ask us, what should be our target for next year? And just an absolute number sometimes is meaningless. Okay, you should do X percentage, Y percentage of employees, Z hours. Uh, becomes very difficult to have a reason as to why X number is right or wrong. The first approach to solve this is to understand what are benchmarks in the industry as to what are your peers doing, what is best in class, how does it change country to country, culture to culture, based on employee sizes, based on your industry type. And the goal was to get to this benchmark. As you mentioned, there are lots of different studies around these benchmarks. I think uh, another question which a lot of our customers would have is just, a lot of the volunteer hours don't get logged. There are certain gaps in recording or data collection, and uh, we wanted to go to the most trusted source of data, and that's where we went to the ESG reports, which are third-party audited, part of annual reports of a lot of companies, part of their websites, and also go beyond the Goodera client universe. So it's just not, it's not about Goodera customers or non-customers. It's about publicly available audited ESG reports of different companies. So that was the first thing, is to have something which you can trust in terms of data, which is audited. And because all your further sorts of action items would be based on this data, and you want to ensure it's very high quality data. So the first thing was to ensure it's extremely high quality in terms of data sanctity, and that's where the audited ESG reports. I think the next thing was also to try and peel the onion in terms of the volunteering numbers, because while you have a particular number, how does it actually matter to you? And every company is different in terms of employee personas, geographic distribution, and many other parameters. So try and understand, who are your peers and how do you compare with your specific peers rather than the broad industry, because there are different challenges that different companies have. So if you have, let's say, frontline workers, it's very different. If you have remote workers, it's very different. So just being very sure of the right sort of benchmarks. Also understand at the geographic lens. So while US and North America, from a cultural lens, volunteers quite a lot. It varies very differently in, let's say, an EMEA, Asia, you know, uh, Africa, and different geographies and continents. So just trying to understand how does volunteering spread across that. And then the last piece is, while you have the numbers, the goal is to get better. And we wanted to share what have the best companies done to get better at in terms of volunteering. So those are some of the key parts that we look through in this report.
Got it. That's great.
And Charlotte, just for you, well, as you mentioned, Apple also has a very, very robust volunteering program. How did you think about benchmarking at Apple, and how would you do target setting from that lens?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think, the larger the company, what we've seen is the harder it is to reach everyone, right? And to get the engagement numbers higher. But we would look at our peers. We had a handful of companies that we felt like had similar programs, similar offerings, and we would benchmark with those and take into considerations those nuances, right, that made Apple different. For instance, half of the employee population was retail based, right? So how do you engage a retail population versus people in a corporate setting, right, in a corporate office? And so I think it is a little bit of an art and a science, right? We can look at the specific numbers, which we're digging into today, but then the art comes in as you really look at those particular factors and those enablers that we'll talk more about that really resonate with your employee population.
Got it.
So next we'll go through the research methodology. Abhishek, I think you can walk us through this a little bit and how it differs from maybe some other resources that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And our process of doing this was going through the ESG reports of multiple companies. So we went through over 1,700 ESG reports. A very small percentage of them had actually the volunteering data. In terms of two data points that we were looking for were the volunteering hours and the number of employees who volunteered, unique employees. So out of those 1,700, we found 162 companies. We wanted to ensure that there is the right coverage in terms of distribution based on industries and sizes, and have a good enough sample set to come to the right sort of conclusions. But the process was go through the ESG reports, look at the volunteering data, pull that through, aggregate everything, and have a lot of analysis and benchmarking on top of it. So that was a exercise that our wonderful team did over the last few months.
A huge body of work. And if anyone wants to dig in and look at exactly who those companies are, it is in the appendix of the report. You can see the full list. So feel free to download that as you have time. So great. So we had a number of insights that came out of this analysis. And, you know, the most interesting one, I think, for all of you is what we're leading with here, that about 20% is the median workforce participation across all corporate volunteering programs. But there's actually, you know, some meaningful runway for organizations to grow and get into that top 25% tier, where you see almost 50% here, which I think is really exciting. And you know, I love that, you know, there's hope here for people, right? So when we looked at the poll in the beginning and it was like, well, maybe that's too aspirational, I don't know if we can get there. And I think, you know, what this tells me is that you can. And so Abhishek, did you want to speak to that a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as you could see, the median is 20.1%, but the top quartile, which is the top 25% of companies, had volunteering participation of almost 50%. So it is like 1 out of 2 employees are volunteering. So that's like the bar or the benchmark for the top 25 companies, top 25% companies. In terms of, you know, the factors which influence a lot of this, I think first it starts with culture and leadership. You know, how much does the company actually believe in volunteering? So it starts with that. And if you have the right culture and the right leadership, it's about also setting up the infrastructure to be able to do this at scale. It's also a function of the industry type, as you mentioned, you know, retail employees versus remote employees, you know, like different personas, you know, Gen Z employees versus, you know, baby boomers, like what's the mix of your employee base? It's also based on the size of companies. So, you know, smaller companies, culture is tight, easier, versus larger companies, it gets more difficult. And the last piece is about how intentional you are about scaling your volunteering. You know, for some companies, you know, volunteering happens to them rather than they make volunteering happen. So it's like building the right sort of enablers, infrastructure, tools, policies to get to that. And we have worked with all companies, you know, who are from the bottom quartile to the topmost. And I think there are very clear patterns as to which companies would have higher participation rates and why. And you know, it's almost like a replicable toolkit which can be customized or personalized based on the company to get to the higher tiers.
Oh, exactly. And I love what you said about culture and leadership engagement, because while we can provide the practitioners with a toolkit of resources and ideas that they can implement at their level, without a leader that is really walking the talk and leading by example and saying, yes, employees, we are all going to go out and do this thing together, and I am coming too, and not just for a photo op, right? Like, this matters, right? This is not just a sort of checkbox program for shareholders, but this is something that is part of the fabric of who we are. I think those are the companies that will have the best success. So for those of you on this call who have the ear of your company leaders, I think that is a message that you want to be tactfully delivering and managing up as much as you can. Great. So our next benchmark that we looked at was the workforce participation rate by industry. So really breaking it down by the different industry sectors, financials, energy, and utilities. So you can see Those above the median at 20%, right, was financials, energy, utilities, technology, commercial and professional services, and then below, healthcare, industrials, consumer. And I think that probably speaks to a number of factors. Some of it may be people that are more frontline workers versus at desks, but not necessarily in the case of energy and utilities. So Abhishek, what do you think are the other factors that might cause some different variances here?
Yeah, I think in terms of as we look at different sectors, the couple of things which influence volunteering percentages. I think the one thing is just the license to operate. Sometimes so there are some companies which take a big toll on resources, both from a environmental and social perspective. And for the license to operate, they need to do good and volunteer. So that's one category. There is second in terms of, let's say, for financials, there is the CRA aspect, which uh, is almost like a trigger for volunteering. And then for a lot of the services based companies, it's also about building connection for employees which are a lot hybrid and distributed in nature. And post pandemic, it has become a challenge to get people together and connected, and especially as the workforce becomes younger. uh, as we had seen that Gen Z and millennials would be a significant part of the workforce moving forward, and for them this matters much higher. So those are some of the influencing aspects that we see across sectors. But I would say if I was a practitioner, in the broad benchmarks, if I have to be average or median in the participation aspect, I need to have 1 out of 5 employees volunteer. And if I have to be top tier, I need to have 1 out of 2 employees volunteer. So 1 out of 5 to 1 out of 2 is like the key benchmarks, as just to keep in mind. The one thing I'll also add is that the volunteer percentage or participation rate is not the only thing. It doesn't demonstrate impact. So more volunteers may not necessarily mean more impact, but for sure less volunteers isn't leading to higher impact. So higher volunteering and better programs. So you need to have both of them. The other piece that you've seen is, as practitioners, how do you get the leadership buy-in? While there are some companies which have extraordinary mission driven leaders, there are some companies who are not as fortunate. And for them, once you have like 1 out of 3 employees doing anything, it becomes material for the company and catches the attention of your leaders. So it's in some way, there is a flywheel that happens as you have more volunteering. And what we've seen across our customer base is that once you reach a 33% volunteering numbers, it almost scales on its own without you to actually push through it, and it becomes like a self-serving sort of scalable program. But those are just some of the nuances that you've seen both from the data as well as working with different companies.
Great. Thank you. So next, we took a look at the data by employee size, right? As I mentioned earlier, it might be harder for a organization with over 100,000 employees to engage 50,000 employees, right? So when you have a smaller organization, it's a little easier to engage your workforce. You're just closer to them, right? Oftentimes geographically, but then it's easier to influence the culture as well. And so I think that is reflected in the numbers, right? We see that the larger the organization is, it is a little harder to engage employees.
Yeah, and this
So,
is consistent with the customer feedback, Charlotte, that we have seen as well, that larger the company, more offices, across the world, different cultures. So it becomes very difficult to have that scale of volunteering. And for companies, as you increase scale, you need to become intentional about your volunteering programs. You need to build the infrastructure, the enablers, to be able to scale. Like with anything else in the company, as the company scales, you need to do a lot more things. I think the other piece that we have seen is a lot of companies have great volunteering programs in and around their headquarters. But as they open these satellite offices, and especially as employees become more distributed, that's where they see the challenge in terms of volunteering. For a headquarters, you're generally fairly sorted, but I think it is a bigger challenge as you spread across different parts of the world. So I think those are some of the other aspects that we see, and I think as you scale both in terms of number of employees, but also in terms of number of locations, offices, countries, cultures, you need to be a lot more intentional about volunteering because it won't happen on its own. And your goal is not to just log hours, but your goal is to enable volunteering. So I think just being intentional about it starts becoming important, especially as you increase beyond the 5,000 employee base. And for some of the
Exactly.
smaller companies, it's also about starting their programs, which they haven't done before. So how do you create like a really robust program? And again, happy to share learnings and insights from all of them.
Exactly. One thing I'll add from my experience at Apple is that when you have such a large workforce, those volunteer champions become a critical part of the strategy for success. And so, I know there are some organizations out there, like banks, for example, that may have regional based like community relations employees, which is amazing. I wish every organization had that model, but if you don't have, a staffing model that allows for FTEs in every geography, that's where, enabling champions, it can be critical for success. And if that is not in your budget to do so, that is where Goodera can help too with, our folks that activate around the volunteer events, and they can be an extension of your team. So just make a little plug for that there, since I know that is a critical point of consideration for larger companies. Great. So the next benchmark we wanted to dive into here is the average hours contributed by a corporate volunteer. So almost 7 hours, which is phenomenal. And, a lot of companies will offer, and we'll talk about this more with enablers, but like a volunteer time off strategy. So, that number may vary depending on if people are aligning to that volunteer time off. But looking here, we calculate this number by dividing the reported annual volunteer hours by the number of unique annual volunteers. And it does vary by industry, as you can see, with the lead being energy and utilities at 11.2. So as we look at this and companies are thinking about goal setting and scaling, Abhishek, what do you think are some takeaways from this figure that people may want to consider?
Yeah, I think a couple of takeaways. While the average time contributed is a number, I think what we have also seen across companies is almost like a Pareto principle on volunteering numbers, which means that 20% volunteers contribute to 80% of the hours, and vice versa. So uh, it's it's there is a big distribution within companies as well. I think a couple of factors which influence this are also the dollars for doers policy, as you mentioned, Charlotte, as to what is the cap. Is it at 10 hours, 50 hours, 100 hours? And sometimes that is a big influence as well across these. So it's important to also understand the employee personas internally, and then have sort of a volunteering portfolio for those. But yeah, broadly 80-20 rule, 80% volunteers, 20% hours, 20% volunteers, 80% hours. Um, there are some sort of uh, outliers as well, but that's broadly what we have seen across the board. And yeah, I think just a shout out to everyone on the webinar. While we have like Q&A towards the end, feel free to ask any questions. We have a research team also on the call, so they would be happy to respond to any specific questions that you might have on any of the data points here.
Great, thank you. So now I think we're going to dive in and show you our volunteer quotient tool and how we compiled this data.
We'll just give you a quick demo of how the tool works so that you could actually create a benchmark report or a VQ report for you. So it's a very simple, three-step process where you could enter some basic details about your organization and try and understand your benchmarks across, your industry type as well as the number of employees that you might have. So we'll just go and take a sample company and fill this form. Takes a couple of minutes to fill this. Just put in your industry type. So let's say this company is a technology company. Put in the number of employees that you have. So all full-time employees all across the world. Put in the number of employees that you have. The next step is how many volunteer hours did your employees contribute to. Also, this data is for calendar year 23 or the latest available data. If you have a financial year that's not calendar year based, but actually based on a month to month. So you could provide for the last 12 months. Put in the unique volunteers that you had. I think there are some companies which also have a lot of I would say struggle to find these data points, but I would say these are like very hygiene data points. So you should for sure have this ready. So, you should have the systems in place to be able to capture this data points very effectively. So you put the number of unique volunteers, put in the enablers. Enablers are, either policies or initiatives that you run to scale volunteering. Can be a volunteer time off policy, have a volunteering platform, ERG networks. So you could just share, which are enablers that you have. And this tool then creates a benchmarking report for you, which helps you understand where you stand compared to your peers. So for example, the volunteer hours per volunteer, it's 10 hours. The median for your industry and your size of employees is 7.34. The highest is 23.36. Workforce participation, you are at 50%, median is 22.18, and the highest is 83.63. And just an initiative score to see how many initiatives which companies have. Typically, the median is 4, highest is 5, and you are in the high bracket. So, and you could download this as a PDF. It helps you understand where you stand from a VQ score perspective. And from there, you could actually use this for internal sort of discussion, sometimes get buy-in from leaders, use it to motivate your champions, have your target setting. Like there are different ways in which you could leverage this. Also, once you've done this exercise, happy to share learnings or best practices from Goodera, which we have seen work for other companies to go from one tier to another. So that's like a quick demo of how this tool works.
Fantastic. Thank you for taking us through that. So once an organization goes through the tool and gets their specific VQ, how would you recommend that they use this information to define their volunteering strategy?
Yeah, I think let's say, we did a quick demo. The company is, probably closer to the median and they want to get to the top tier. So the first thing is just have like a North Star metric that you want to have. So let's say you want to get to 1 out of 3 employees volunteering. So that's your North Star metric. That's 33%. Now then you try and get to, okay, how do you achieve this? So in terms of setting targets, so so many volunteers mean so many volunteering events. On average, these many employees come up per event. So you know how many events you want to have. Based on the number of events, you know how many champions you might need. And then how do you spread this volunteering across your month or day of service, through your champions, through your ERGs, so across initiatives, across countries, across months of the year. So first define your North Star metrics. So understand where you stand in terms of benchmarking. define where you want to get to. That goal, break it down into multiple targets or sub goals, and then have the enablers to achieve those targets. So that's the objective here, is first to understand where you stand. Like, um, if you want to get better at anything, you need to measure where you stand. So it starts with measurement, and this is the step one. And then from there, you figure out your next steps of goals, country wise, month wise, initiative wise, champion wise, and then enablers to achieve those targets.
Great. So here we go. On this slide, we kind of break it down what Abhishek just talked you through as far as analyzing your benchmarks and targets, right? Like, what is your North Star? Where is it you want to be in however long? Designing what that looks like, right? What are those enablers going to be, and backing into them? And then looking at your geography, right? Like, what is it going to take? How many events, how many champions per region?
Yeah, and our recommendation is always to build a volunteer portfolio, because you have different employee personas within your company. So there are some employees who would, do the quick 15-minute kit builds and volunteer activities, and there are some who need and want to do the long-term skills-based volunteering. So there is a big spectrum of employees you might have. There are some who want to do, go outdoors and do something fun together with their teams, and there are some who want to be, doing something virtually on their own. So there is like a whole bunch of varieties of employees. So understanding your personas, and basis those personas, having the right sort of portfolio or the different types of volunteer opportunities is really, really important. And Charlotte, as you mentioned, there is also a fair amount of cultural or geographic nuances to it. So there is compliance at country levels, there is cultures at a country level, there is sort of needs of the community which varies based on the country. So a lot of things which vary at a country level which you need to be mindful of. And there are some countries also which are just huge, and there are actually at a city level there is or a community level there are different nuances. So just being mindful of that as well as you build this through. This is just an example on the bottom of the slide. You would see, a company which has, a goal of achieving a set of number of volunteers, and divided into, let's say, a month of service, Earth Day, new employee onboarding, MLK Day of service, and through the year volunteering. So that's like, step one of breaking your target down into these initiatives, and then across countries and months of the year.
Fantastic. And this, as we'll see in the next slide, this may sound like a lot, but we've got you. We have all sorts of tools and resources and recorded webinars, workshops for going through this target setting, and planning out your calendar. So if this is something you need help with, let us know. Let your Goodera contact know that you want to dig into this with us. And we've got all sorts of resources to help you out. So back to this idea of enablers, as we mentioned a couple of times now, there are a number of things your organization can do to activate your employees and make it easy for them to engage. So, first you have to have that target, and you got to communicate it with folks. You've got to have policies in place, right? So these are sort of the building blocks that you want to get lined up before you really broadcast about your program. If you are a very large organization, that champion network will be a key piece of the puzzle. You really want your experience to be seamless, right? Nobody gets more frustrated, we've all been there, than when you have a really bad interface, right? And so you want people to have a really good experience with the technology, right? So getting that all lined up, whoever your vendors are, whatever tools you're using, making sure that's dialed in. Mapping out the calendar. Are you going to engage around a month of service? Is there, some tie-ins that you want to do around Earth Day, MLK Day, summer of service, right? These are all things you want to map out, right? Maybe around the holidays. As we mentioned earlier, getting your leaders involved, right? Make them visible, get them to send emails, have them post for pictures of people at events, right? You can use this all for your internal communications, right? When you broadcast those messages, take the pictures at the events, have the messages go from the leaders that matter, but not too many, right? You don't want to overdo it. So have see if you can get a commitment from your top executives to do a couple of messages a year each, right? To the audiences that matter to them. Engaging with your nonprofit partners, right? Maybe you showcase a handful of organizations that it really makes sense for your organizations to align with, really in strategic partnerships. And then, of course, measuring impact, right? Because that's what we're all here for, right? Just getting a bunch of people out to paint fences doesn't really mean anything unless whatever activity they're doing is ultimately benefiting the recipient, the people at the nonprofit that they are there to serve, right? So what does that look like? And how do we then communicate it back to our volunteers to keep them feeling good, to keep them engaged, to keep them coming back for more? And we also know there are people like to volunteer in many different ways, right? So you've got people that are just going to come out to that big company offsite event that, lines up with the company picnic or something. They're your social volunteers. They're there for the party. But then you have your other volunteers who really want to get more hands-on, more one-on-one, and those might be your volunteers that do the more long-term ongoing engagements like mentoring, right? Or they might sign up for a weekly thing at the soup kitchen, right? And help serve meals with a group of employees, and that might become a regular thing that they do. You've got folks that are really passionate about various moments. And as we look at the calendar, there are various DE&I type of moments that people may want to align with in their various ERG groups. So activating those networks could be really meaningful for your organization. So as you can see here, there are numerous opportunities to engage new employees, to engage, at offsites and meetings and conferences. We've got some programs that address both activating prior to disaster, right, where we could build solar lamps, or a program called Light a Life. And that's really helping to set up organizations with these solar lamps so that when disaster does strike, they have some of these resources on hand. And so, Abhishek, are there any others you'd like to mention before we move on?
No, I think it's just these are some examples where you embed volunteering as part of company culture. It's just not a particular day of the year that you volunteer, but you do it through the year through different use cases. I think the only one I would like to highlight is the AI for good, as in everyone is talking about AI and how it would change the world, but I think it should change the world for our space sooner, and a lot of volunteers would love to possibly build solutions for nonprofits using AI. So that's one of the interesting new ones that we have seen lately.
Great. And I know we've got about 15 minutes left and we want to save some time for questions. So we will pick up our pace here. There's also various volunteering formats you could consider, right? Maybe for engaging frontline employees, a kiosk set up in the back of the house might be a good opportunity for micro volunteering. You've also got standard volunteering, which might be an hour at the office in a conference room. Perhaps there's more extended opportunities that work for your organization where you actually go offsite to do something at the nonprofit or maybe outside somewhere. And then, as we mentioned, there's those longer term opportunities like mentoring where, you do multiple engagements with an organization or an individual. Okay, so we've got another poll question for you to consider before we dive into our next trend. So what are you doing? Which of those enablers that we talked through and those policies that we mentioned are your organizations using? If you could just take 30 seconds to answer that. Volunteer time off, PTO, to volunteer, dollars for doers, a volunteering platform like Benevity, Your Cause Deed, flagship volunteering campaign, right? This might be your month of service, collaborating with your ERG networks around various initiatives and moments on the calendar. Target setting, your North Star we talked about, a champion network, planning out your calendar, engaging your leaders, communicating. I hope you're communicating. I hope you're all communicating, because if you're not talking about the program, then the people will not know about it. Geographic expansion, and finally, impact measurement. And feel free to check all that apply. Now, that's a lot, but we're going to keep moving. And here we go with our results. So looks like a lot of you are using volunteer time off. That's fantastic. A lot of you have a platform. You've got a flagship campaign, ERG networks. Congratulations. It looks like the majority of you are doing that. Engaging your leaders. That's really great to hear. And communicating. Good. Glad to hear it. All right. Fantastic. I'm glad you all are leveraging most of these enablers. Okay, so next, our next and final big insight is around workforce participation with these enablers, right? So you can see here that we have 1.5 times more participation on average when companies are leveraging these enablers. So we also break it down by the different enablers for you to see here.
Yeah, and if just for ease of understanding of this chart, you could see, let's say, ERG networks. So 81% of the companies have or leverage ERG networks for volunteering, 19% do not. And then amongst the companies who have ERG networks, their numbers are 1.5 times the companies who don't. So this is a way to understand this graph. So 70% have a volunteering platform, about 60% have a flagship volunteering program. So different sort of enablers. You would see how many companies have those enablers versus not, and then on the right you see here what is the increase in volunteering because of having these enablers. So each one of them have a material difference in terms of your volunteering numbers. Think every company is different in terms of what might work for them versus not. Let's say like a volunteer time off policy might be difficult for some companies to apply. It's a huge cost to the company to give a couple of hours of employee time to volunteer. But there are some companies who truly believe in this and would offer it. So it's based on what is right for your company, and there is no one size fits all. But obviously, each one of them has a certain cost and a benefit, and we are happy to share our learnings and understanding of working with multiple companies on what has worked for which company and why, and what is the cost benefit analysis of each of these enablers. But I think as you think about building a refined or a sophisticated volunteering program, some of these enablers are actually hygiene for you to have as you build and scale, because that's a basic expectation of your employees.
Great. And as we think about, and as the practitioners on the call think about how to prioritize the different enablers, and we'll walk you through just a few of them on the next couple of slides. I think, as Abhishek mentioned, it really depends on your company culture and what will make sense and resonate within your organization and what you have a budget for, right? And let's be honest, that is a big influencer as well. So just real quickly, we've got templates for you around volunteer time off policy guidelines. As we said, this generates about 32% higher workforce participation. And, we've got like a couple different phases you could consider for how to roll that out. Next, we've got some different benchmarks for you to look at around the volunteer time off policy. And there we go. So these are some different companies, right, who've got, and the number of volunteer time off hours they're offering per year. So quite generous over at Gap. a number I've heard a lot is around 10, but as you can see, there are a number of organizations that are offering much more than that. So very impressive group here. And next, we did a webinar not too long ago where we did talk about the volunteer champions. So remember, we talked about this being a function of how many volunteers you have or that you want, and then you multiply the number of events times the number of volunteers per event, and then you take all those events and with the number of champions engaged, you multiply the number of events conducted per champion to get how many events you would need to have. But we dive into this in the webinar we did a couple of months ago. You can scan the QR code here to access the recording. It's on the Goodera website. And we dig into the champion network there. So I encourage you to check that out. Around geographic expansion, we know there's a lot of nuance here. These are just two examples of different countries with very specific regulations that would need to be considered. We've got several other regions where we can dig into the details with you if you need help with that. I think for the sake of time today, we won't get into the details there. But as you can see, a number of regions that we've got expertise around engaging in. And so please leverage our expertise as you need to.
The only thing I'll add here, Charlotte, on the previous slide is just every country is culturally unique and has different needs in the community, has different cultural nuances around volunteering, has different compliance and regulations, as you mentioned. So, as companies, especially globally distributed companies, think about volunteering, it's not just one program, but you need to make it like globally relevant, but also locally relevant, and just be mindful about these cultures. And we are happy to share benchmarks around volunteering at at a region level, so that you could start understanding which region should probably contribute more from a volunteering lens compared to others. So just wanted to ensure everyone knows that every country is different, and happy to share learnings and benchmarks from each one of them.
Exactly. And we mentioned we have a number of various toolkits, templates, resources. We've got you. You don't have to start from scratch. There's no reinventing of the wheel here. Okay, real quick announcement. We do have a very exciting study that we're releasing soon on the ROI of employee volunteering with Dr. William Fleming from Oxford University. So you'll be seeing more about that via email and on social media when that is ready. So just keep an eye out for that. And now we can get to our questions. So we've got a number that have come through the chat already. So just to kick us off here, I know this incentives is always a hot topic, so I'll lead with that one. But the question is how to increase volunteering if you don't have perks such as donations, monetary gifts, maybe a volunteer time match program, that kind of thing. So how do you engage if you don't have a budget for incentives? Any thoughts on that, Abhishek?
Yeah, I think we have seen that the budgets in terms of incentives are just one part of the volunteering enablers. We have worked with numerous companies who might not have a dollars for doers policy or a volunteer time off policy. Like they don't have the budgets for that, but still have very high volunteering numbers. So as it's about figuring out which enablers will work for you. You might have very strong ERGs, for example, or you might have, let's say, employees in certain regions which are very passionate about volunteering. You might have a whole bunch of Gen Z or millennial workforce, and figuring that out. The other thing that we have seen is employees love volunteering in areas where they have expertise in, especially the skills-based one. So yeah, I think as we discussed, there is no one enabler or which fits all companies. And Yeah, I think our philosophy at Goodera has always been to scale volunteering without the need for more budgets. And that's how you make volunteering more accessible to millions of people. If it needs more budgets, it would just be the VPs and the C-suite who would volunteer, which doesn't change the culture for the company. So for sure, all aligned and happy to brainstorm on that.
Great. Next, we had a question about how do you engage employees in the hospitality industry or restaurant employees? That's obviously a tricky one, right? Because there is very limited time to engage with them when they are not out serving. So how do you reach those individuals?
Yeah, I think so 2 points here. One is this comes under the category of, in some way, blue collar frontline workers where they might get paid by the hour, they might not have a lot of time to volunteer, they're always on the shift or on the go. So one thing which we have seen work really well is what we call mobile kiosks. That's a format of volunteering that works really well for this employee persona, where there are kiosks, anyone can come in for 15 minutes, do their bit, and do it whenever they have the time rather than at a particular time of the day. So these kiosks are mobile, can go to every restaurant every week kind of stuff. So it's very easy to execute, works well with the schedule. The second thing is, because these employees are restaurant employees, they might be very passionate about food insecurity, and maybe that's a cause that you might want to think about. But just initial thoughts basis what we have seen with similar employee bases.
Right. And I think the key there that you mentioned is the micro volunteering, right? So like, what can we do back of the house, behind the scenes, that might be an easy way for them to engage, maybe, at the beginning of the shift, the end of the shift, when it's slow, when they're just standing around folding napkins, maybe, right? Like, is there something that can easily be done in that capacity? Maybe it's, we've got this dress for success model, right? Where it's like, bringing the clothes and boxing them up for organizations and that sort of thing, sorting through it so that, that could be an option to consider. So another question that came up in the chat, and I know we just have a couple minutes left, but I know this is another hot topic that people struggle with, is what has worked for getting volunteers and ambassadors to track their volunteer time, right? It's like, they did it, but how you can't report on it unless they track their time. So how do we get them to do it?
Yeah, and I'll take that, and maybe Charlotte, you can take the ambassadors one. But on the volunteer part, I think what Goodera launched is a API which integrates with different systems. It enables like a QR code based tracking where you know uh, what we have heard from a lot of volunteers is like logging hours is almost like a punishment for volunteering, like no one wants to do it. So like, how do you simplify the process where our host would scan a QR code for the volunteers, which just auto tracks time. Happy to share it. It takes a lot of time, and we to share that, and we have a couple of minutes, but there is a technology solution to make it super simple, and then not a heavy lift for the volunteers, but also ensure it's auditable, because a lot of companies might have a dollars for doers attached to it. But Charlotte, would love to learn from you on the ambassadors or champions, and probably some of the other questions we can share across as answers as a follow-up to this webinar.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, depending on how your organization's program is set up and the structure there, right? Some organizations may empower those volunteering champions to actually just be able to track time for everyone that attended, right? And particularly if there is not a volunteer time match, right? So there isn't that like incentive for an employee to go in and do it themselves. That might be a setting that your organization has where the champion can just do it for them. I think, recognition is an important factor to consider for the champions, right? I mean, these people aren't getting paid to take on this extra volunteer role. So they're wearing this hat outside of their regular day job to further the causes, but also maybe for some internal recognition, right? Perhaps in their day job, they don't have the opportunity to be seen as a leader, to stand up and talk to people, to organize events. And not only does this, excite them and they like doing it, but maybe there's also an opportunity for some recognition, right? So in messaging to them, right, it's helpful to maybe mention that we recognize our volunteer champions in this way throughout the year. So please check the hours so that we know how much you're doing, right? We know you're planning out these events and getting all these employees to go participate. But if we don't have a record of it, we can't recognize you when we really want to because you're working so hard. So I would incorporate that into your messaging with champions as much as you can, and build out what does that recognition program look like, right? Because as I mentioned, they are taking on an extra role within your company out of the kindness of their hearts. And so how can we make that continue to feel good for them, even when, they might be drowning in their regular work? So as we mentioned, we are at time, and we can follow up with some of these additional questions and answers. Please download the report. Stay tuned for some other exciting announcements. We will be doing this report annually going forward, so you'll have the latest and greatest data every year at your fingertips, but also use the tool to find the data that is most relevant for your organization. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Abhishek, for taking time out of your day to walk us through this, and more to come. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time.